Live AIDS posters showed one image over and over: a naked, starving African child covered in flies. The same photo was used for decades, but this wasn't about helping Africa. It was about selling a story. The concert ignored the real cause of Ethiopia's famine. A dictator named Mengistu was forcing millions from their homes. Western money made it worse. African voices were silenced. By 2025, even Bono admitted he had a white savior complex. Live Aid didn't save Africa. It taught the world to see an entire continent as helpless and hopeless. On July 13, 1985, the world came together in front of their screens. Two massive concerts, one in London, one in Philadelphia, promised to save lives. The faces were familiar, the music powerful, and the goal simple: raise money for starving children in Ethiopia. The result was staggering: more than $150 million raised. But while the crowd danced, sang, and cheered, something else was happening behind the curtain. And almost nobody noticed until it was far too late. Doctors Without Borders had already warned Bob Geldof before the first note was played. They told him what was really happening: that the Ethiopian government, led by Mengistu Haile Mariam, was using starvation as a weapon, that the regime was taking international food aid and using it to force people into death camps in malaria-ridden areas, that over 100,000 were already dead or dying in these forced resettlements. They told him their teams weren't allowed to treat some people or even hand out blankets. They told him famine was being used to control and kill. But Geldof didn't want to hear it. He told them he didn't care about politics, that he would shake hands with the devil if it meant saving one child. That decision would become one of the most devastating in the history of humanitarian aid. Just 3 months after the show, in October 1985, Doctors Without Borders went public with what they had seen. They were immediately expelled from Ethiopia, and the warnings they gave Geldof were ignored. The food didn't save the people. It became a tool for genocide. Later investigations would reveal that millions of dollars raised through Live Aid had actually been used to buy weapons, Soviet rifles, grenades, artillery, and even tanks. These weren't small mistakes. These were choices that fueled a civil war and extended it for years. The same money that came from well-meaning families watching starving children on TV was being turned into death. Behind the scenes, things were breaking apart long before the music even started. Geldof had pulled artists in by lying. He told Elton John that Queen and Bowie were already in. Then he told Bowie and Queen that Elton was in. He did this over and over, stacking names like poker chips to force commitments. He was desperate. When a promoter suggested the Hooters open the show in Philadelphia, Geldof snapped in Rolling Stone, "Who the fuck are the Hooters?" Everyone was tense. Phil Collins agreed to something nobody should have done: play both London and Philadelphia on the same day. He went on stage at Wembley at 3:18 p.m., ran off, jumped into a Concorde jet, and landed hours later in the U.S. By the time he reached the second stage, he was finished. He later said it felt like someone had unplugged him. During Led Zeppelin's set, Collins nearly walked off completely. The band blamed their ruined performance on him. The safety problems started early. Wembley had 72,000 people. Philadelphia had 100,000. But the barrier systems weren't ready. During U2's set, Bono looked out and saw fans being crushed. At 7:17 p.m., he jumped 10 feet off the stage into the mud and pulled fans out with his own hands. Security joined him, pulling people over the railings. A 15-year-old girl named Cal Kalik came just to see Wham! She was one of the people Bono pulled out as the crowd squeezed in. The pressure in the front rows could have killed people, and this was only the beginning of the show. The broadcasts were no better. In Moscow, during the band Autograph's set, the feed broke. Russian viewers heard the music, but saw footage of cherry harvesting from a random documentary. For over 2 minutes, the scenes didn't match. In the US, Collins tried to do an in-flight interview on the Concorde, but all that came through the TV was loud engine noise. Backstage, even the people running the event couldn't get passes for their own teams. One producer said, "My own people can't get credentials, and we're producing the show." That was the kind of chaos hiding behind the polished image. Then came the truth. In March 2010, the BBC aired a documentary called Dying for Aid. It was the bomb that shattered everything. They showed how Tigrayan rebels, led by Meles Zenawi, had stolen 95% of the money raised by Live Aid. Documents proved it. Only 5% of the $100 million went to help famine victims. The rest was divided. 45% used to run rebel operations, and 50% used to buy weapons: Soviet AK-47s, rocket launchers, grenades, heavy artillery. All bought using money people had donated to save children. Rebels created fake relief groups, moved money through Sudan, and bought weapons in Khartoum's black markets. The man who finally spoke out was Aregawi Berhe. He was there, a founding commander of the Tigray People's Liberation Front. He kept quiet for 25 years, but in 2010, he said enough. He said they used a 5 to 45-50 formula. He said the rebels used Live Aid funds to wipe out villages, that they used weapons against Amhara and Oromo civilians, that he had the records, the serial numbers, the dates, that he couldn't live with it anymore. And the CIA knew. They had a memo dated November 15, 1985, just 4 months after the concert. It said, in plain language, that the diversion of aid was almost certain. It even listed how the money moved, from European NGOs to Mengistu's regime, then into Soviet weapons. The US government saw it happening in real time. But they said nothing. They stayed quiet to protect future fundraising. Meanwhile, the war got worse. By the end of 1985, at least $75 million of aid had already been used to buy guns and tanks. And the killing went on. Bob Geldof stood by what he did. Even when the numbers came out, even when it was proven, even when people died. He said he didn't care about politics, that saving even one child was worth it. But the math didn't agree. According to journalist Linda Polman, Live Aid may have killed as many people as it saved. The weapons bought with those funds extended Ethiopia's war by at least 3 more years. That war killed another 1 million people. Some of the worst massacres, like the bombing of Hausen in 1988 that killed 2,500 civilians in one day, were done with weapons bought using Live Aid money. That money created more refugees who needed more aid, which brought in more donations, which bought more weapons. The circle never stopped. And by the time the war ended in 1991, Ethiopia had one of the largest stockpiles of Soviet weapons in the region. Not from military budgets, from charity. And then there was Led Zeppelin. Their Live Aid performance was supposed to be a big moment, a reunion. But it fell apart before it began. Jimmy Page was drunk. John Paul Jones flew in that day. They had 1 hour of rehearsal. Stage monitors didn't work. Robert Plant had already done 3 shows that week, and his voice was shot. When they stepped onto the Philadelphia stage, it was a disaster. During Stairway to Heaven, Page's guitar was out of tune. His playing was a mess. Collins called it crap, said Page was dribbling on stage. The chemistry was gone. The timing was off. Nothing worked. The whole thing was so bad that Led Zeppelin refused to let it appear on the 2004 Live Aid DVD. Plant later said it felt like a funeral. Page called it panic. Collins said it was sulfur in the air. For 20 years, they buried the footage. The final blow came from Phil Collins himself. He said the reunion never should have happened. No rehearsal, no prep, too many drugs, and too much pressure. It damaged their name. It haunted them. They didn't try again until 2007, and even then, the ghost of July 13, 1985, followed them. In her 2018 memoir, My Love Story, Turner wrote about that moment. She didn't laugh it off. She didn't say it was part of the plan. It wasn't discussed, she said. He just did it. She remembered seeing the look in his eyes, how she could tell he had a naughty idea forming. There had been no time to prepare, no agreement, no warning. And for someone who had survived the torment of Ike Turner, years of being beaten, controlled, and humiliated, this sudden act on stage triggered old memories of helplessness. Mick wasn't Ike, but in that moment, Tina wasn't in control again. The crowd in Philadelphia saw none of this. They saw what they thought was rock and roll energy. The stadium cheered. Viewers at home, all 1.9 billion of them, probably thought it was just a fun surprise. But Turner later admitted how unsettled she felt. She had chosen that outfit carefully. She wore a leotard under her skirt because deep down, she knew things like this could happen. "I was covered," she said. But that didn't make it okay. She had to prepare for possible violations instead of just focusing on the music. That was her reality. None of this had been rehearsed. On July 12th, the day before, she and Jagger had gone over their songs, State of Shock and It's Only Rock and Roll. There was nothing in the plans about clothes coming off, nothing about a shock moment, but Jagger made the decision on the spot. He didn't ask, he just acted. And because it was Mick Jagger, and because it was Live Aid, no one questioned it. Turner later said she forgave him. She called him a very old boy, someone she had known for a long time. But her choice of words showed the truth behind it. "It wasn't like some random guy pulled off my skirt," she said. "It sounded like comfort, but it exposed a deeper issue. The idea that women in the music industry were expected to tolerate these things, especially if the man wasn't a stranger. What Jagger did became one of the most replayed moments of Live Aid. For years, it was remembered as exciting, even sexy. But in today's world, it looks different. Now people see it as a clear example of workplace harassment dressed up as rock theater. And it happened in front of nearly 2 billion people. That same day, 3,500 miles away, at Wembley Stadium in London, another Live Aid moment spun out of control. U2 was on stage, playing their song, Bad. The plan was tight, just a 20-minute slot, play a few songs, keep it clean. But during the song, Bono looked down into the crowd of 72,000 and saw something that shook him. A girl, just 15 years old, was being crushed against the metal barrier. Her name was Cal Kalik. She'd come with her sister to see Wham, not U2, but now she was fighting to breathe. The crowd was so dense that she couldn't move. She was suffocating. Bono jumped from the stage. He ran into the pit. And then, in front of over 1 billion viewers watching on TV, he pulled her from the crowd and slow danced with her for almost 8 minutes. The performance stretched from 4 minutes to 12. They skipped songs. Bono ad-libbed lyrics from the Rolling Stones and Lou Reed. And while it looked like a beautiful moment to many watching at home, the truth was more complicated. Cal later said she thought she was going to die. Her ribs were bruised, her legs dangled as Bono pulled her over the barrier. The pain lasted for weeks, but the emotional impact lasted much longer. She developed crowd phobia. She had nightmares for years. The cameras had captured everything: the slow dance, the mud, the fear. It was seen by 1.5 billion people. And she was only 15. Bono meant well. He really did save her life. But what happened afterward, the global spotlight, the trauma, the invasion of that moment, changed her forever. U2's manager Paul McGuinness was furious. He called Bono's move career suicide. The band didn't play their biggest hit, Pride, in the name of love. The Edge later admitted he thought the whole performance was a disaster. Bono even said afterward that the band wanted to fire him. But weeks later, something shifted. Journalists started praising the moment. Fans called it iconic. Still, for Cal, the memory was always mixed. She became a lifelong U2 fan, but she never saw concerts the same way again. And the truth was, if Cal hadn't actually been in danger, Bono's leap into the crowd would have just been reckless. Wembley's crowd density that day was about 1.4 people per square meter, almost at the level that causes real danger. It was a warning, a foreshadowing. Years later, events like the Astroworld tragedy in 2021 would show just how deadly crowd crushes could be. At Astroworld, 10 people died from compression asphyxia. Live Aid had no real crowd protocols, no modern safety barriers, no medical stations like we'd expect today. It was luck, not planning, that kept more people from getting hurt. Bono's rescue looked like a dream, but it exposed the edge of a nightmare. Back in Philadelphia, Bob Dylan took the stage with Keith Richards and Ronnie Wood. It was supposed to be historic, but from the first chord, everything fell apart. Dylan's guitar string snapped during "Blowin' in the Wind." There was no guitar tech. Wood handed him his own guitar, grabbed a backup that was wildly out of tune, and tried to make it work. The curtain had fallen over the amps, so none of them could hear the monitors. They were out of sync, off key, lost. Then Dylan said something that shook the room. Before singing "When the Ship Comes In," he told the crowd, "I hope that some of the money that's raised for the people in Africa, maybe they can just take a little bit of it, maybe 1 or 2 million, and use it to pay the mortgages on some of the farms that the farmers here owe to the banks." The crowd clapped, but others were stunned. Dylan had just compared famine relief to bank debt. People were starving to death in Ethiopia, up to 1.2 million dead, 200,000 children orphaned, death rates of 270 per 10,000 in some camps. And Dylan was asking for mortgage help. Bob Geldof was backstage. He'd organized the entire thing, and when he heard what Dylan said, he exploded. "Africa's dying, you prick," he reportedly shouted. Later, in his book, Is That It?, he called Dylan's words crass, stupid, and nationalistic. He wrote that Dylan had a complete lack of understanding of the issues and said, "There is a radical difference between losing your livelihood and losing your life." Dylan didn't argue. He just walked off stage and told his manager, "Sorry." Some say he was on painkillers that day. Music critic Michael Gray called it the most disheveled, drunk performance Dylan ever gave. Others believed he was just uncomfortable with the whole thing, rich celebrities patting themselves on the back in the name of charity. Maybe that was true. But whatever his feelings were, the comment landed hard. Ethiopian officials were outraged. Humanitarian groups called it insulting. Dylan's line about American farmers became a symbol of cluelessness in the face of one of Africa's worst disasters. Live Aid raised $40 million. It changed lives. But it also revealed cracks. It showed how showmanship could cross boundaries, how good intentions could still hurt, and how massive stages often hide messy truths. Whether it was Jagger ripping a skirt, Bono dragging a girl from a crush, or Dylan asking for money that wasn't his to give, each moment reminded the world that even in the name of saving lives, people can still get it wrong. When The Who took the stage at Wembley, it was already fragile. They hadn't played together since their 1982 breakup. They were under-rehearsed and hadn't had the time to tighten anything. But what happened next, no one expected. Just as Pete Townshend sang the line, "Why don't you all fade away during my generation?" the BBC television feed blew out. A fuse went dead, and for almost 8 minutes, viewers saw nothing. Just a faint echo of Roger Daltrey's voice floating in the background while the screen stayed blank. The feed didn't return until halfway through their set. Townshend was furious. He smashed the red timing light that told bands when their 20 minutes were up. They ended up running 5 minutes over. Meanwhile, John Entwistle's bass kept cutting out. Nothing worked the way it was supposed to. They finished with "Won't Get Fooled Again," but by then, the damage was done. Townshend later admitted it probably would have been better if they had left the stage to Queen and Michael Jackson. Because right after them, Queen didn't just perform, they took over. There's a myth that Queen somehow turned up the volume louder than everyone else, but that wasn't true. The sound was locked at 100 decibels, and the controls sat 100 meters away from the stage in a sealed rack. No one could reach them. What Queen did have, though, was Trip Khalaf. He was their sound engineer, and he knew how to play the system. Instead of panicking like The Who or Status Quo, Khalaf calmly maxed every legal setting. He squeezed every bit of clarity and punch out of the mix without breaking a single rule. Brian May later admitted they sent Trip ahead to set all the limiters. He didn't cheat, he just played smarter. Queen hit the stage with a perfect 20-minute set that sounded massive. Every note, every clap, every stomp felt louder, but it was all legal. While others stumbled through sound checks or missed cues, Queen looked like they'd been rehearsing for months. And maybe they had. Not everyone had that kind of control. In Moscow, the Soviet Union tried to join the global broadcast with a rock band named Autograph. But when their time came, something bizarre happened. Instead of showing the band, the broadcast cut to a documentary about cherry harvesting. For 2 minutes, people around the world watched Russian farm workers picking fruit, while heavy rock music blared in the background. It was surreal. The footage had been prepared in advance by Kremlin officials as a safe backup, but a glitch triggered it at the worst possible time. When technicians finally switched the feed, Autograph appeared halfway through their song Golovo Kruzhenie, and no one really knew what was happening. It was supposed to be a moment of unity. Instead, it looked like Cold War slapstick. The USSR had tried to control the narrative and ended up showing cherries instead of rock and roll. Then came Led Zeppelin, or what was left of it. They hadn't played together since John Bonham died in 1980. For Live Aid, they decided to reunite, but everything went wrong from the start. Phil Collins had agreed to play drums, but he only had 2 hours of rehearsal. He listened to the songs during his Concorde flight from London to Philadelphia. That was it. When they tried to play Rock and Roll, Collins missed the opening. Jimmy Page was so frustrated he snapped, "The drummer couldn't get the beginning." Collins later admitted he faked parts of the set, miming, pretending, doing anything to survive. Robert Plant couldn't find his voice. Jimmy Page looked lost. Collins said he wanted to walk off the stage, but he didn't. Because if he had, people would have spent decades asking why he quit. So he stayed. And it was a mess. That mess followed him. Collins had already played at Wembley earlier that day, then jumped on the Concorde jet at 354 miles per hour to cross the Atlantic. The flight took 2 hours and 52 minutes, but the toll was brutal. The supersonic altitude changes triggered vertigo and nausea. When he landed in Philadelphia, Collins was drenched in sweat. He looked sick. After his second performance, he reportedly threw up backstage. He later said the entire day felt like a nightmare. He was exhausted. He wasn't prepared. And he knew it. The backlash came fast. The media mocked his double-continent dash. They said it cost $12,000 for a single ticket. They called it a publicity stunt, not charity. People said Collins looked smug. They said he used Live Aid to boost his own image. What started as a noble effort turned into a punchline. Even BBC host Andy Kershaw called the whole concert shallow, smug, and sanctimonious, pointing straight at Collins. Inside the music world, some peers never forgave him. They saw it as ego, not empathy. Collins later admitted it hurt his career. He said it damaged relationships. For years, people questioned his sincerity. The thing he thought would show his heart ended up putting a target on his back. Sir Peter Blake, the same artist who once made colorful pop art, was now placing black and white photos of starving Ethiopian children next to jolly Christmas images. One child was naked. One looked skeletal. They were never named. They weren't treated like real people. They were symbols. The main Live Aid concert poster used the same image of a fly-covered, naked African child for years. Again in 2004, and again in 2024. This single photograph became the face of Africa for millions of Western viewers. And that face was always hungry, always helpless, always silent. The message was clear. Africa was a place of suffering. Africa had no hope, and only Western celebrities could save it. Children in British schools began to distance themselves from their African roots. They said they weren't African. They didn't want to be seen as smelly or stupid. The image of fly-covered children was now the image of Africa. It ignored everything else. It ignored the real reasons people were starving. It erased history. It erased politics. It erased truth. In reality, Ethiopia's famine wasn't just about drought. The government itself had caused much of the destruction. Colonel Mengistu Haile Mariam had forced millions of people out of their homes through something called villagization. From 1984 to 1990, more than 10 million people were displaced. Families were moved into grid-planned villages with no preparation, no food, no medicine, and no choice. By March 1986, nearly 800,000 people had already been brutally moved. Of those, 594,890 were pushed out hastily, forcibly, and pitilessly, costing the state 767 million birr. Nobody asked if they wanted to go. No scientists or farmers were consulted. The goal was control, not care. Médecins Sans Frontières said it clearly. The famine was not just natural. It was man-made. But Live Aid didn't talk about that. They showed starving children. They showed empty bowls. They showed tears. But they didn't show the dictator. They didn't talk about how Western money could make things worse. They didn't say how some of that money would end up in the hands of warlords. They didn't ask questions about where the money was really going, because asking those questions might have made the campaign less inspiring. And for the organizers, inspiration sold better than truth. Kenyan academic Wangwe Wagoro called it pity porn. It wasn't real help, it was exploitation. People were not just being shown as poor, they were being shown as powerless. Ethiopian exiles protested in Europe when Bob Geldof shook hands with Mengistu, the man whose policies had killed tens of thousands. It felt like a betrayal, but the protests were ignored. The voices of Africans were drowned out by celebrity speeches and emotional ballads. When Band Aid released a new version of the song in 2014, the backlash grew louder. This time, the video showed the body of an African being dragged across a screen on UK primetime TV. No one ever showed a dead Ukrainian when raising funds for Ukraine. But African bodies? Those were allowed. The lyrics said things like, "There's no peace and joy in Africa this Christmas. and there's death in every tear. It didn't matter that millions of Africans were celebrating Christmas with family, music, and food. The narrative had already been written, and that narrative was hopeless. By 1988, Mengistu had already relocated 12 million people. Yet none of this was part of Live Aid's message. The West didn't mention the violence. They focused only on the hunger. They didn't talk about justice. They talked about guilt. And people donated. 150 million was raised. But hardly any of it went to local African organizations. The aid was filtered through Western agencies, through governments, through foreign NGOs. It was colonialism in a new costume. In 2010, Gebremedin Araya, a finance official from the Tigray People's Liberation Front, admitted that rebel groups had lied to aid groups and siphoned off money meant for starving people to buy weapons. The CIA had reported the same thing in the 1980s. Money meant to feed the hungry was used to fund a war. But the concerts kept going. The songs kept playing. The world never stopped to ask what their donations were really doing. In 2019, a media study found that viewers were twice as likely to see negative portrayals of Africa than positive ones. The most common words tied to Africa were violence, death, corruption, and poverty. In 2025, a CNN documentary called Live Aid, When Rock and Roll Took on the World, said it plainly. The concert colonialized African aid. The legacy wasn't just about music. It was about a continent left with an image it never asked for. Even Bono, in 2025, admitted that he had a white savior complex. In his memoir, Surrender, 40 Songs, One Story, he said Band-Aid's approach was tone-deaf. He said celebrity activism can be self-serving and fake. But Bob Geldof didn't want to hear it. In a fiery interview that same year, he dismissed all criticism as bollocks. He said the idea of white saviorism was just a word, a theory like original sin. He said he didn't care about political correctness. He said, "It'll pass, and you'll still have hungry people." He didn't mention that Live Aid's biggest failure was never hunger. It was how it taught the world to see Africa through a broken lens.